I can remember my father telling me when I was a child, and I would love to stargaze, and we would go out into the night together, into the garden. And one day he pointed out the stars, he pointed out the Pleiadian cluster, and he said, that's where you come from, because you have a little mark on your chest that's the map of the Pleiades. And he said, that's where you were born, that's where you come from. And I always remember that. I must have been about 4 years old. And then what I know is that I would always love to go out in nature and lie on the earth, on the grass, caress the grass, and I'd always wanted to merge with the earth. And I would talk to her, and I would let her know I could talk to her and tell her anything I wanted to. And I felt such a close connection to the earth. And to animals, I remember always also wanting to get close to the animals and to hug them and to hold them close to me. And that was always such comfort. And then when I was in school and in grade school, I remember in second grade, for example, I would write about something my brother taught me, which was meditating and closing my eyes. And he said, if I hear a popping sound, it means that I'm out of the body and in the astral. And I would write about this. My second grade teacher was amazed. And then I remember later on when I was in, I guess, middle school and high school, I was fascinated by Oriental philosophy. And, by that time I was already reading Rumi and other Sufi poets, and I was very interested in the occult. I also remember that when I was growing up in Latin America, which is where I spent most of my childhood, we would live in different countries. And when we lived in Honduras, for example, lived right there by the forest, my brothers and sisters, they would take me out into the forest and they would tell me all about the fairies and the elves, and we would build houses for them, and they were always part of our life. Magic was very real to me, always. The invisible world was always very real. It was not fantasy. From the time that I was a little girl, the biggest ritual was sitting around the table, eating together, and that is the most meaningful ritual, which I still practice in my day-to-day life. It is where conversation happens. It's where discovery happens. It's where we connect to other people. It is the simplest form of community. And this kind of ritual happens everywhere on the planet, mostly in places where people are still more connected to nature and to each other. This ritual, unfortunately, is being lost in modern day-to-day living, where people are rushed in their lives, rushed away from what is truly important. But this is the most fundamental ritual humans have, is eating together. It's the most beautiful one. In high school, it was almost just natural for me to be very, very drawn to the romantic poets. And my parents named me Rima. Rima is the name of this mystical bird girl from a book called Green Mansions. And she came from the stars, and she lived in the jungles of South America. And so did I. And so my personal life was so tied to this this character from this novel. And so all of this is very magical in my life, and I would say my life is very magical in that way. And then when I was later in high school, I was into the Oriental philosophies, and I was always very, very deeply moved by the figure of Jesus as a teacher of love who came to teach us about love. I felt always very connected to that message in my life. I always admired that, and also my family, we were very deeply connected to that message, because my father, when he worked with the UN, he worked with FAO, and he worked with small farmers and developing nations. And so our life was always, the message was always that not only did we need to connect to everybody around us, but that the people from the countryside always had the greatest messages to give us. So we needed to listen to them and to their stories. This was very important. So I developed a reverence for them, and developing a sense of reverence for life and for wisdom that comes from the most hidden places, and maybe the simplest places, from children, from nature, from people that live with nature. That's where the true messages come from. And so I learned about reverence, and I learned to listen. And maybe that's what I would say that is what actually led me into a fuller experience of my own consciousness in my life, and to respect my path. Our body contains, and it is human consciousness. It's the expression of human consciousness. It speaks, it listens, it delivers, and it carries us wherever we need to go. It takes care of us. I admire it, I think it, every day more and more. There is something that I really want to convey to people, and it's whoever's listening, is that the body is the final frontier. It's not out there somewhere. It's in the body. We need to go in the body to grow spiritually. It's in the body where we learn what we need to learn to expand our consciousness, and feeling comfortable in the body. It's really where it's at. I dialogue with the body, because it's a dialogue. I hear it, I listen to it, I speak to it, it speaks back to me. So things are always happening in the present. And so consciousness, the way that I started to become informed that the body is my best friend and probably my greatest teacher of all, is that I started to listen to my body, and I started to realize that I am a steward of my body. I need to take care of it, because it is constantly giving me feedback on what I'm doing right, or where I'm lacking, where I'm not giving enough, or where things are just not happening in the way that are supporting me. So then it's instant feedback, and I can feel the body. I respond emotionally. I have gut reactions, or I have even just the idea of sweating, the idea of body temperature, all of these things of the body. These are messages. So don't be afraid of what you might experience in the body. Don't feel afraid of experiencing pleasure and beauty and enjoying what it's like to be in the body. I'm not talking about being completely polarized by a selfish kind of drive of seeking only pleasure. I'm talking about something that is more fundamental than that, and it's true presence with your body and being very honest about how your body feels for you and how you feel in your body, and recognizing that. It's where compassion comes from. It feels right or it doesn't feel right. It's your barometer. Trust it. It's how we can discern. And tuning into the body. It's a practice of discernment. And then we don't need teachers outside. I mean, we have nature, but we don't need other spiritual teachers than our own body. It's the greatest spiritual teacher in our life. We don't need religions. We have our body. This is our sanctuary. It's our temple. We need to take care of it and we need to listen to it. We are the stewards. To be a centered human being really means to live in the awareness of who you are, beyond personality. And asking the question, who am I? Can take years to answer, lifetimes, or it's one of these eternal questions. We can spend the rest of our life answering this, but it really is living with a question that is important and not so much finding the answer, because it is these questions, these kinds of deep questions, that keep us in the center of our experience. But in any case, our own body, which is our greatest teacher, is constantly asking us to focus again, to bring us back to center, to what is important, to how am I taking care of what is my tool, my vehicle here. These are very, very real things, and the body is very real, and drawing our attention to that. And doesn't mean being self-centered. It simply is a practice of paying attention, and paying attention to the body. That's our closest. That's what we have with us, and so it's just developing a practice of paying attention, being in the center, being in the moment, being mindful. This is being in the center. It is becoming friendly with the idea of feeling what it's like to be in the body, feeling, gaining a deeper insight into how we process emotions or thoughts. And this paying attention is, how do I understand certain triggers? What does it do to me? What do I think of? What am I feeling? Just these very, very basic questions that we live with, that we can continue to ask ourselves daily. So I would say again, consciousness is a process of creation. It is, it's this igniting, this process of ignition. It is not something, it is it's not a static thing. It's not something that can be contained. It is an experience. Consciousness is an experience of creation. It is how creation experiences itself, how it continues to receive feedback from itself and to continue to create. Listening is something we develop when we become aware that our greatest ally is our body. And because our body speaks to us, it gives us feedback on, I eat this and this happens, or I touch. From the time we are children, when we learn about fire, or about falling, or about, this is how we learn to listen to our body. And as we grow older and are pulled away from our body and into a highly intellectual world, we stop developing the ability to listen to our body. I would say continuing to listen to our body is one of the most important practices we need to do every day, which is why something like, I would say something like dancing is important, because you are using your body in motion and you're learning what feels right, what feels pleasurable, what feels beautiful, or powerful, or any of these. But you can listen to your body regardless of that. You can listen to your body anytime you are triggered by a certain situation, or the way you interpret external stimuli. You listen to your thoughts, you listen to your emotions. You ask yourself, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? How do I understand this moment? How do I live with the way that I interpret certain events or certain information? And so when you start to understand that you can take this at a surface level, or you can go even deeper and train your listening even more, then you start to understand that truly it's an amazing, our body is, it has an awareness that is beyond our own, of course, our own conscious awareness, and it is highly, highly intelligent. And so I started to respect this intelligence, and so I started to listen even deeper. I thought, okay, I need to pay attention. And that's when I also started to understand that I can enjoy the body in ways that I hadn't previously explored. One of the greatest joys right now in my life is dancing tango, Argentine tango. It is truly an amazing experience. And it's also, it's a spiritual experience, because the body is a spiritual experience. Really, it's highly spiritual. So all of this, when we start to practice this and be mindful about the body and experience that the body is constantly giving us feedback, that's how we listen, and that's how we have a conversation with our own body. And then that's how we can actually start reading other people's bodies, because we learn from doing it with our own body. And so we start learning how the other person is carrying anxiety, or where they're carrying anxiety, or where they are, how they're feeling pleasure, if they're happy, if they're sad. Everything about the body is always dialoguing with us, our own and another person's body. So we become experts at reading people if we are able to read our own. Silence is very important. We don't value it enough in our daily life. We need to be alone a lot and in quiet. We need quiet time and alone time, and most people nowadays are too busy to have that in their lives. But it is the principal conduit for contemplation. And contemplation is how you learn to listen. It's also how you learn to enjoy life to the fullest, because then you appreciate every moment. When you contemplate, it automatically puts you in a frame of mind where you are quiet with yourself and you can ask yourself the deeper questions of life and the simple questions of how you feel, what you think about. This is what happens when you meditate, but it can happen when you contemplate with your eyes open or being out in nature, simply thinking quietly to yourself. So make sure you have moments of silence and moments of doing nothing, because doing nothing is one of the most important things we can do in life. Really doing nothing. So language is very important for me in my work. It limits me as far as English and Spanish, because I work with these two languages. And language for me is one of the most important tools for personal transformation. And my work is about finding new states of being and thinking and feeling so that we can all feel like we're more creative beings. And so the way that language is important for me is that I understand the power of language. Language is a symbolic representation of a thought or a feeling. It is a vibrational manifestation of certain thoughts and feelings. And so when I work with language, I make sure that it gets spoken, or it gets transmitted, or it gets listened to in a whole new way. And it is that newness that brings about the kind of attention and focus that is important for growth, for evolution, for change, for changing habits, for changing mental patterns, even for changing how we relate to memory. But really, language, we're working with symbols, we are working with intention, and we are working with the way that people understand the world they live in. They use language to represent that. And they use language to formulate what they pay attention to, what they focus on. This is how I understand where that person is living, within what kinds of thoughts, within what kinds of feelings, because of the language they use when they talk to me. And so when I listen to that and I use that and I speak in their same language, that's when a true connection is created. That's when I can listen even more and even more deeply to them. And so when I use language in that way, and they can hear themselves and they can see themselves or hear themselves because I'm mirroring their own language to them, then it's so much easier for them to become aware of the world that they have created around them, or their own internal world. And it's all connected, of course. And so this is how language is a really powerful tool for me. This is how I use it. And I also understand that language because it is so powerful, can influence people depending on the state of consciousness that they're in when I'm using language. It can be a powerful tool for change. So that language is much more important than what meets the eye or what is at the surface of understanding. And when we dive into when we start to truly understand what language is and how to use it, we start to respect it so much more. So now I use it, I'm very careful with how I use language, words, tone, intonation, how I manipulate grammar, how I deconstruct it and put it back together in a new way. I'm just very careful about language because I know that we use it. It's what we use to build our world from the time we're born, and we don't realize its importance in our day-to-day speech. But our language is what builds our experience of reality. It's that important. We live in the present to begin with. There is nothing else except present. Time is artificial. We live time, we live events differently now than we did even 2,000 years ago. And I can tell you from my own experience, if you are in the countryside and you don't have a watch and you're just living with nature, it is the cycles of the day that will tell you and speak to you in a way that is completely different from how you would experience that same day living in a big city. And so there's a lot to this idea of time that has to do with chaos, with entropy, with the acceleration of events and movement. And time is it can work for us, and it can also come in the way of our own development, of our own connection to the earth and to what actually moves within us at a much deeper place, because time throws us out of our body and into the rush of things that need to be done. But when we go into a space of meditation or hypnosis, trance, we change how we relate to time. We stretch time, the idea of time. We stretch our experience. We can make an hour feel like maybe just 10 minutes, or we can make it feel like 3 hours. So it's a very subjective experience. It's where we are. When we consider that we exist within a much larger framework than just this limitation of a physical body, when we understand that we are much more than this, then we can start to live from a vantage point that informs us that time is something we can use and it serves our purpose for certain things. But there are much larger concepts of experience that are way beyond the idea of time or the limitations of time. So it gives us a feeling of eternity within a three-dimensional vehicle, which is our body. But when we can start living from a vantage point of that standpoint of being eternal, then it changes everything about how we live every day, every moment. Simply being in a state of attention and paying attention is how you practice mindfulness in life. And practicing mindfulness is one of the basic steps for practicing a spiritual life. If you're not mindful, then you lose enjoyment of the moment. You stop being creative, because when you are creative and you access that part of you that goes into the kind of appreciation of how you can transform a moment out of your own intention and inventiveness and experience a creative moment in your life. You can only really do that if you're paying attention to what you have not yet seen. And the interesting thing about doing that is that going into what you have not yet seen and paying attention to what you have seen, and where you can go into what you haven't seen, that is where creation happens. That is where you meet the new. That is where genius can come forth. And the subject of curiosity is always what takes you there. So attention is simply being curious and practicing that. Attention and personal attention, it's all personal, right? But when you live within a state of attention, being aware that attention is how you understand at a deeper level, then it allows you simply to be more mindful in life, to enjoy every moment, and to be able to decide if you want to either remain in a negative state or move into a more harmonious, beautiful, positive state. So mindfulness is how you sit yourself in the present moment, how you feel your body, how you are aware of your thoughts, your feelings, your past, and paying attention. It's basically that. Attention has many levels, right? We can be paying attention when we are in this regular, normal state of consciousness. We can have a different level of attention when we are in meditation or when we are in a state of trance. And probably those deeper states of attention they have the ability, the capacity to bring a lot more information so that you can see where it is that you want to move towards, or things that you need to change, things that you hadn't seen before about yourself. And so really paying attention in those deeper states allow you to grow in a much more enjoyable, productive way. And truly, if you are an adventurer, and if you're curious enough, and if you are rebellious enough, then I would say you really want to be paying even more attention to what you are conforming to what you are choosing to allow in your life. And by paying attention and by being curious, you decide that you can, in fact, change that around if you want to. You can, and you have the ability and the power to be something other than what you have been told to be, or what society is telling you to be, or what you have been up until now. Trance is something that happens when you are deeply relaxed. You can have your eyes open or closed. But trance happens when you can be listening to somebody speaking and you go into a kind of a daydream. That's trance. There are many levels of trance and many depths. Or you can be in trance when you are in a state of deep hypnosis. You can be in trance if you're looking at something beautiful in nature and go into a state of awe. Awe is one of the most transforming experiences, and it is a state of trance because it's beyond the imaginable. All of a sudden you meet up with something that transforms you, that takes you away from ordinary life. That's trance. Trance can be as simple as being in the breath, or as dancing across the dance floor in a close embrace. All of these can be a moment of trance. You're reading something. It also happens, of course, when you're watching television or looking at the monitor. You just go into a different state of awareness. And when that happens, a lot of the filters that we use can be either dampened or you filter out less information. And so it's easy when you're in a state of trance. It's easy to be, I guess I could say, to be manipulated in certain ways by certain not so beneficial agents out there. Yeah, it's important because we need to know what we are being fed as far as information and as far as stimuli, because when we are watching television or out shopping, we are unknowingly being bombarded, I could say, with a lot of information, and the mass media doesn't have the best intentions in mind as far as your growth and your spiritual expansion. And so just being aware of this when you are out there and in a state of trance, or being in front of the television with all the commercials, just simply be aware, because as you go into those deeper, more relaxed states of awareness, all of those commercials are going just right into your unconscious mind. And they are, they're feeding you information. And so the other way that you can use trance that's very, very beneficial is by going into meditation, or going into self-hypnosis, where you are the one who can control your inner world, and you go wherever it is that you are being guided to go at that moment, at your own pace and how you wish to do it. That's the beauty of trance also. Being in a state of hypnosis or trance is simply a very relaxed state of consciousness, where you can be affected by outside stimulus in a much more intense way, where you are more vulnerable to these kinds of suggestions from the outside, and you are much more suggestible. That's a hypnagogic state. Probably the one thing I would say is that meditation is probably one of the most accessible hypnagogic practices that you can do to yourself, that you can do on your own. And it is the way we have now, it is the tool that we have now for personal transformation and change, for spiritual expansion, to access our own creative potential and to become that creator that we are inside and to live from that center. So this is probably the most important thing that we can do in life, is to pay attention to that creative seed that we carry and to live from that and to make it work for us. So that's the importance of meditation, of hypnosis, of trance. That's why we have this. So let's take advantage of it. Most of us define ourselves by our personality, by our memories, by our self-talk, by habits of perception and habits of interpreting the world around us. We create a picture of who we think we are, and we live from that picture that we have. But in fact, it's only a photograph. And it is important to move beyond the photograph. We can use the photograph, it's useful information, but it is important to move beyond that and to see what is beneath this. Who am I? Who am I? What do I feel? What do I think? What are the kinds of thoughts I have on a daily basis? What are the kinds of emotions I have? Where is my unhappiness? Where is my joy? How much of this unhappiness or joy carries me throughout the day? What affects me, and how does it affect me? And so going beyond this picture and asking the real important questions gives us a new picture of who we are. And that's exciting. So once we understand what memory is and that we create memories, we're constantly recreating memories because we write them over and over and rewrite them, and we're constantly readjusting memory. It's not a static thing, okay? And it has to do with a habit, with habits that we create from a very early age, depending on our earliest memories, which are developed because they inform our fight or flight primal instincts. And so we develop memories, we develop habits of perceiving. And then the way that we use memory to change certain behavior patterns is that we can examine a memory that we have, and then we can also understand and realize that we don't have to be stuck to that memory. We can discard it if we want to also, right? Or we can see it from a different perspective. And simply adopting a different point of view of that event that we have frozen in time in our minds, we can all of a sudden see things from a different perspective. And then we have a different relationship to that event. And that's how we change memories. And that's how we can consciously and willingly readjust our own experience to that. And so that's how we can really play around with our own lives in such a beautiful, creative way. We don't have to be stuck to things. So when we talk about neuroplasticity, we're simply talking about lighting up new neural networks in the brain. And what that means is that by accessing states of not knowing, we begin to see, hear, and feel what is new and different. It brings us into a state of presence. It brings us into a state of mindfulness. And by accessing this state of not knowing and paying attention to what is new and different, that's when we can put certain boulders, let's say, certain roadblocks into the normal, habitual pathways we have in our brain of thinking about things and perceiving things and interpreting information. And so once we put those roadblocks in there, we force the brain to light up new avenues to relate to external stimuli, to habits of thinking, to fears, to trauma, to events of our past in a completely different way. And this has a neurophysiological effect on us. So that's why when we break down habits of relating to certain issues or certain things, and we bring in a whole new experience, all of a sudden we collapse triggers, what we call triggers in my line of work, and we bring in an entire new state of feeling, thinking, and seeing and experiencing the same situation in a completely different way. So that's the use of, that's why we talk about neuroplasticity and the importance of developing that.
Great. Okay.
And I can say something else about regarding neuroplasticity. It's also how we stay younger longer. And if people talking about having a sharp mind all the way into their very mature years. And so one way of doing this is by intentionally developing neuroplasticity. And there are many ways of doing that, of course, involving your body in kinds of things that require it to use more of the brain, by either dancing or doing sports, or dancing is probably one of the best ways. By doing any kind of physical activity that requires you to move in ways and explore balance, explore how you can change your body to position itself in different ways. All of these things affect the brain in a very powerful way, and so this is also a way of staying younger longer.
Nice. Okay. Does everyone have a secret world? And if so, what does this mean?
Of course, we all have a secret world if we but listen to our deep emotions, to our deep thoughts, we will start to realize that we have a world within us that comes out maybe when we're alone, with our own thoughts, with our own feelings. And what is important about this secret world is that it is a place where you can imagine anything you want. And you can play, and it is your playground. And you can be as magical, as silly, as childish, as crazy as you want to be. And you can really allow that inner child to surface and to come forth. And that secret world is, it's where all of you, your most true you, actually has free range of expression. So absolutely, this is one of the best things we have in us. It's this secret world. But if we realize that we can have so much fun playing in our own little secret world, we have so much to gain from that. So much to gain from that. Probably the most important thing is our innocence. And once we all become innocent again, we can change this world around. We can stop violence. We can stop perceiving each other as people to be afraid of. We can really connect at a heart level. We can be this sparks of consciousness that we are at the highest, most pure, most beautiful levels that human beings are capable of. So that's the most important thing. It's important in our day and age not only to cultivate mindfulness and presence, but it is important to have a spirit of adventure, because when we develop curiosity and we become curious enough about the institutions we live with and about the systems that rule our society, then we can start to really bring them into question and having a rebellious spirit, having this spirit of a revolutionary, because we need to be revolutionaries in life now. The reason is this: there are so many social structures that are impeding us from developing our true human capacities. And it is important for us to realize what feels that is more in harmony with what I truly am as a creator. Are these things satisfying my life? Are they enough for me now? Or is there something other that is more in tune with who I really feel that I am? More in tune with the idea of universal love, with the reality of community, with the expression of compassion. What is in harmony with those, and what is breaking us apart as a human race? What is in the way? What are old things that we need to get rid of? What is the new that we need to move towards? That is, of course, in alignment with nature and beauty and harmony. So all of these questions, it's important to find out what is in the way and what we need to move towards. And it is important to get rid of them if they are in the way. And it is important to move forward and to Go beyond into the unknown and explore. Explore what we haven't lived yet as a human race. That's where we need to go. What don't we know yet that we can become that is different and new and more in tune with who we truly are? That's where I want to go. That's where we all want to go. So that's what we need to be asking ourselves now. One of the simplest and maybe one of the most enjoyable practices that one can do at any age to nurture an interior life is to go out in nature and look around you and ask yourself, what would it be like to be a tree? How would I feel if I were a flower? What would I do if I were a bee? What would the world look like if I were a bird flying so high? Or if I were a jaguar in the jungle? All of these questions. What do things seem like from a different point of view? And if you take animals as your teachers and imagine what that is like, that is how you start to consciously, at least intentionally, use the power of your imagination to explore different perspectives. This is, of course, again, we return to neuroplasticity, but it takes you out of your own self and into the skin of something else. This is how we develop empathy. This is how we develop community. This is how we return to the earth. This is how we create peace. This is how we change humanity, all of us together. This is this leap of humanity that we need to do, and it's so simple. All we need to do is simply create empathy and compassion. There are simple ways of doing it. The ritual of eating together. But it does begin with your imagination and playing and being comfortable with your own child inside. It doesn't matter how old you are. I would say that we can get caught up in very complex ideas and very complicated language and very high-sounding language and terms. And really, it's best to keep things simple and honest and truthful, because we can get lost in terminology and completely lose connection to the fundamental message. And again, I think that it is about how we can move into states of compassion, connection, understanding one another, listening, being free to explore our human nature, which is benevolent. It wants to connect. It wants to be happy. It wants to share. These are the basics of life. Upon this foundation, we create beauty and harmony around us. That's where we can thrive. We can't thrive in anything other than that. So really, an end to violence has to happen. We have to change how we continue living with old ideas and return to nature, return to the forest. Yeah, we are the forest.